Before we get to the questions, I thought I'd say a few words about the Four Noble Truths. It's mainly because it is the core teaching of Buddhism. It's according to the text, the discourses, in the Theravada tradition, all Buddhas were supposed to teach the Four Noble Truths, right? And it's very essential to the understanding, realization of Nibbana. That you have to understand and you realize the Four Noble Truths. And what are these Four Noble Truths? It is that there is suffering. That's the first Noble Truth. It sounds kind of pessimistic, but interesting. The Buddha started with that, but I'll explain it later. So the first is there is suffering. Second is the cause of suffering. Right? There is the cause, and that is craving. The third Noble Truth is that there is a cessation of suffering. Right? The suffering ends. And the fourth is that there is the path to realize the cessation of suffering. Right? So sometimes people who haven't studied very deeply the Buddha's teaching, the teachings of Buddhism, this is about Buddhists, very pessimistic. We go on and on about suffering, suffering, and suffering, but that's not true. The Buddha taught that there is suffering, but also the end of suffering, which means happiness, right? So it's a very practical teaching, something we all can apply to our life. And it's interesting why the Buddha would frame his teaching, because that's the first discourse of the Buddha. Was It was 3 months after he became enlightened. He taught the Dhamma Pavattana Sutta, and that's where he expounded the Four Noble Truths. And just reflecting, you were the Buddha, you just became enlightened, so extremely happy. He apparently sat under the Bodhi tree and stared at it for 7 days in utter bliss without moving. So, obviously Nibbana is the highest happiness. And so extremely happy person. Why focus on suffering? Interesting. Yeah. So obviously, he can pitch the Dhamma obviously in any way he wished. And yet he focused on just telling people that there is suffering. And maybe even after he became enlightened, he did say that the Dhamma that he realized, obviously he didn't invent the Dhamma. Dhamma is reality, is truth. It's just something he saw into, the nature of reality, the laws of nature. And he said, he says that this enlightenment is very difficult to realize. The Dhamma that he discovers is profound, subtle. That's very hard for humans, normal people, to understand the Dhamma that he discovered, because we're caught in sensual indulgence, we're caught in sensual enjoyment, and we're caught in doing and being. And the Dhamma that he discovered is actually, it goes in the opposite direction of peace. So maybe that's why he framed it in that way, that obviously there is happiness in the world. There is happiness in the five sense world. If there weren't any happiness, people wouldn't be doing it, right? Wouldn't be chasing after good food, movies, relationships, achievements, fame, gain, loss, degrees, knowledge. There's also, obviously there is some happiness. But if you look deeper, it is because these sort of happiness is unstable. It's not permanent, right? And it's outside of our control. And that's the reason it gives rise to suffering over and over again, right? So there is, so with most of us, we have to admit that there is, some kind of stress in our life, because the happiness that we're after is impermanent, it's unstable, and that makes it. And the more we grasp onto it, the more stress. The more we suffer over it, right? Happiness, for most of us, is always, it looks like it's within reach. Every time we get there, it's gone a few feet ahead of us. And the faster we run, the faster we chase after it, the further it runs. So it's something that we don't want to admit, but something when we look deeply, we have to kind of go, oh yeah, the Buddha knew what he was talking about.